In 2008, a team of psychologists ran an experiment with a simple premise. Hand people a small sum of money, just $5, and tell them how to spend it. One group was instructed to use the cash on themselves. A second group was told to spend it on someone else. Later, as scientists peered into their brains using neuroimaging, they found something surprising. The people who gave the money away, even in such a small amount, showed more sustained activity in the brain's reward centers than those who spent it on themselves. Weeks later, that neural glow still flickered. The pleasure of giving lasted longer than the pleasure of receiving. Why would that be? Why would the human brain, an organ supposedly sculpted by the cold logic of evolution, reward us more for helping others than for helping ourselves? This raises a fundamental contradiction at the heart of who we are. For generations, we've been taught that evolution is a ruthless engine of survival, driving life forward through competition, aggression, and the pursuit of personal advantage. Survival of the fittest has echoed through biology classrooms and popular culture alike, conjuring images of lone wolves, tooth and claw struggles, and self-interest as a biological imperative. And yet, when we hold a door open for someone, donate to a stranger's GoFundMe, or simply offer a listening ear to a friend in pain, something warm surges through us, something that feels right. Why would evolution make kindness feel good, even when it costs us something? Consider the story of a man in Winnipeg, Canada, who, in the dead of winter, dove into a half-frozen river to rescue a stranger's drowning dog. He had no connection to the animal or its owner, no obligation, no reward. He could have died, but he didn't hesitate. When asked later why he did it, his response was simple and haunting. I just had to. His brain was scanned weeks after the incident by curious neuroscientists, trying to understand what drove such spontaneous altruism. The scans revealed something striking. The areas associated with fear or calculated decision-making were quiet. Instead, regions linked to empathy and the brain's reward system, the same ones activated in the earlier money-giving experiment, lit up like a flare. He hadn't acted out of logic. He had acted out of something deeper. So what's really going on here? Is kindness just a psychological accident, a quirky byproduct of social living? Or could it be something much more ancient and powerful, an invisible survival tool hardwired into our biology, quietly shaping the trajectory of human civilization? Is it possible that kindness isn't the opposite of evolution, but one of its most ingenious creations? Long before skyscrapers, smartphones, and social contracts, humans were small, fragile creatures trying to survive in a dangerous world. Unlike saber-toothed cats or massive mammoths, our ancestors didn't have claws, brute strength, or speed. What they did have was each other. Early Homo sapiens thrived not because they outmuscled the environment, but because they outcooperated it. The roots of this cooperation ran deep, not just in shared hunting or defense, but in caregiving, empathy, and emotional achievement. Anthropologist Sarah Hrdy's groundbreaking research into cooperative breeding turned long-held assumptions about evolution on their head. She argued that human infants, being uniquely helpless at birth, required not just a mother but a network of caregivers, what she called alloparents, to survive. This meant that empathy wasn't a luxury. It was a survival mechanism. The ability to read the emotions of others, to intuit needs before they were spoken, and to care even when inconvenient, became core human traits, not sentimental add-ons. This ancient wiring didn't vanish as we evolved. Instead, it took up residence in the folds of our biology. Enter oxytocin, often dubbed the love hormone, though that moniker barely scratches the surface. Oxytocin floods our systems when we hug a loved one or look into the eyes of a baby, but it also spikes when we extend trust, give generously, or even witness acts of compassion. It fine-tunes our sense of connection, heightens our ability to empathize, and shapes our decisions in favor of the group. In short, oxytocin is less about romantic love and more about social glue. It's the invisible hand nudging us toward unity over division, care over cruelty. Modern neuroscience has caught up with what our ancestors intuitively knew. Kindness changes the brain. Functional MRI scans show that when people perform generous acts or even just observe them, key regions of the brain light up. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex, associated with emotional regulation and valuation, and the striatum, a core part of the reward system, become active. These are the same circuits that light up when we eat delicious food or receive money. But here's the twist. The activation is often stronger when the kindness is directed outward. The brain isn't just passively recording good deeds, it's actively reinforcing them. Being kind isn't just morally good, it's biologically satisfying. And yet, in a society that increasingly rewards speed, competition, and self-promotion, this ancient circuitry is often left idle. We live in a paradox. Despite being more digitally connected than ever before, people are lonelier, more anxious, and more divided. Rates of depression and isolation have soared, and researchers now say that chronic loneliness is a more significant predictor of early death than obesity, smoking, or heavy drinking. The very connections that once ensured our survival are fraying. But within this bleak picture lies a quiet revolution. Some scientists believe that reactivating our kindness circuitry through deliberate acts of compassion, generosity, and community is not just psychologically beneficial, but physiologically healing. Kindness isn't just a moral imperative, it may be the most powerful antidepressant we've ever known. As we stare down the crises of our age, from political polarization to mental health epidemics, the question becomes urgent. Have we underestimated the power of human warmth? Could the same traits that helped our ancestors survive ice ages and predators also help us navigate the emotional coldness of the modern world? And if so, what would happen if we treated kindness not as a soft virtue, but as our greatest evolutionary strength? In 2020, a team of neuroscientists published a study that quietly upended how we understand the power of kindness. Working with trauma survivors, individuals whose lives had been scarred by violence, abuse, or loss, the researchers introduced a simple intervention: acts of deliberate kindness. Not therapy, not medication, but structured moments of giving and helping others. The results were astonishing. Over time, brain scans revealed changes in neural activity. Areas tied to fear and hypervigilance quieted, while reward centers, the same ones lit up by joy, safety, and connection, began to glow with new life. Kindness, it seemed, wasn't just an abstract virtue. It had the power to rewire a wounded brain. For people whose trauma had carved deep grooves of mistrust and isolation, compassion offered not only relief, but repair. This was no longer just about feeling good. This was about healing. But then came the dilemma. Not everyone responded the same way. In some individuals, those with certain types of brain injuries, those suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, or those with sociopathic or psychopathic traits, the kindness circuit remained dim or even dark. Their brains didn't light up with reward when giving to others or when witnessing compassion. Some felt nothing. Others, especially those with extreme trauma histories, felt pain. For them, kindness wasn't soothing, it was threatening. Vulnerability triggered fear. Generosity felt suspicious. And trust activated the very same circuits trauma had wired for danger. The brain's reward system for kindness wasn't a universal feature. It was shaped, sometimes distorted, by personal history. And then there's the other extreme where empathy goes too far. Psychologists have begun to document cases of empathic distress and compassion fatigue, particularly in caregivers, therapists, activists, and even children who grow up in emotionally volatile homes. These individuals are so finely tuned to the suffering of others that their own emotional systems overload. Their brains respond not just with sympathy, but with full-blown distress cortisol spikes, sleep disruption, depression. In them, the very neural wiring that evolved to support community begins to malfunction. The reward of kindness becomes a burden. This is the other side of the kindness paradox. What neuroscience now shows is that the human brain's response to compassion is anything but uniform. It's a delicate choreography of neurochemistry and life experience, oxytocin, dopamine, serotonin, trauma, genetics, culture, and attachment patterns all playing their part. For some, kindness is a lifeline. For others, it's a trigger. For some, empathy flows easily. For others, it's a struggle to feel anything at all. And in this variability lies the central tension. If kindness is just a biological feedback loop, if it depends on brain structures and chemical exchanges, does that make it less noble? Does it reduce selflessness to a trick of the nervous system? Or does it elevate it, proving that even our most moral instincts are so vital, so deeply human, that evolution carved them into our very flesh? Perhaps the question isn't whether kindness is moral or biological. Perhaps the real challenge is accepting that it's both, and understanding that the same circuitry that lets us lift one another up can also leave us exposed, exhausted, or even exploited. Kindness, it turns out, is not a simple good. It's a complex force, fragile, powerful, unevenly distributed, and deeply essential. And now, more than ever, we must ask, if kindness is wired into us, how do we protect it? As we dive deeper into the biology of kindness, a more nuanced picture begins to emerge, one that exposes the complexity, contradictions, and radical implications of compassion. At the core of this complexity lies the difference between empathy and compassion. Though often used interchangeably, they are not the same. Empathy is the capacity to feel what another feels, to suffer with, to internalize another's emotional state. Compassion, on the other hand, is action-oriented. It's not just feeling the pain, but doing something about it. And this difference isn't just semantic, it's neurological. Brain scans show that intense empathy lights up the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system. Prolonged exposure to others' suffering, especially without agency, can overwhelm us. But when empathy evolves into compassion, when we shift from passive feeling to active response, brain regions engage, the prefrontal cortex, associated with decision-making and resilience, the motor cortex, primed for action, and the nucleus accumbens, linked to reward. Compassion, it turns out, is not just more sustainably, it's more empowering. This difference is starkly visible in history's darkest chapters. During World War II, many Nazi officers and soldiers reported deep love and empathy for their families. Even while committing or enabling atrocities, their ability to empathize did not extend to those deemed other. This selective empathy intensely focused within the in-group and deactivated for outsiders, reveals a chilling truth. Empathy alone does not guarantee morality. It must be coupled with compassion to become truly ethical. In contrast, the post-genocide reconciliation process in Rwanda offered a radical counterpoint. Following the 1994 genocide, the nation introduced community-based forgiveness rituals called Gakaka. Victims and perpetrators faced each other in public forums, told their stories, asked for and offered forgiveness. Neuroscientists later studied individuals who participated in these rituals and found measurable changes in their brains. Aggression-related activity in the anterior insula diminished, while areas linked to perspective-taking and emotional regulation showed increased connectivity. Forgiveness not as a soft ideal, but as a hard-won act of compassionate courage reshaped not only communities but neural networks. In our digital age, Kindness has found a strange and complicated home on social media. We've all seen posts about charitable donations, good deeds, or expressions of solidarity. But are these performative acts sometimes dismissed as virtue signaling, triggering the same neural rewards as quiet, private generosity? Interestingly, studies suggest they do activate reward regions, including the ventral striatum and medial prefrontal cortex, though the effects are weaker and often more transient. The brain, it seems, still responds to giving, even when it's shared online, but not as powerfully. Authentic generosity appears to create stronger and longer-lasting neural change, hinting that our brains may be attuned not just to the act, but to its intent. Experiments designed to promote kindness have begun to tap into this potential. During Random Acts of Kindness Week, participants in various studies were asked to perform small daily acts: buying coffee for a stranger, writing a thank you note, or picking up litter. The effects were measurable. Serotonin levels rose. Cortisol, the stress hormone, dropped. Participants reported elevated mood, reduced anxiety, and increased social connectedness. Even more fascinating, these benefits extended to people who merely witnessed acts of kindness. The ripple effect was real, and it was biological. But there's a flip side to this story, too. What happens when kindness is not welcomed? When a gift is rejected, a favor goes unacknowledged, or compassion is met with coldness? Neuroscience research shows that the brain processes such moments of unreciprocated giving as a kind of social injury. The anterior cingulate cortex, which registers both physical and emotional pain, lights up. Dopamine levels drop. The same system that rewards kindness can punish it when it goes unreturned. This creates a delicate balance. The more we give, the more we risk feeling pain when our giving isn't recognized. This pain doesn't mean kindness is a mistake, but it underscores its emotional vulnerability. To be kind is to be open to joy and to rejection. This brings us to a crucial social question. Can we build systems that amplify kindness at scale? Can education, healthcare, and justice systems be designed not just for efficiency, but for compassion? There are hopeful examples. Schools that integrate social-emotional learning show improved academic outcomes and reduced bullying. Hospitals that emphasize empathetic communication report better patient outcomes and lower burnout among staff. Restorative justice programs, which focus on rehabilitation and reconciliation rather than punishment, have been shown to reduce recidivism and increase victim satisfaction. But such systems often face resistance. Bureaucracy favors metrics over meaning. Institutions reward compliance over care. The deeper challenge is cultural. We have built many of our social structures around control, competition, and fear, not trust, cooperation, and compassion. Kindness, then, is more than a personal choice. It is a radical act, especially in a world that doesn't always reward it. The science is clear. Compassion changes brains, bodies, and societies. But the question remains, can we choose to design a world that supports it, protects it, and helps it thrive? Or will kindness remain the exception, a fragile light flickering against systems built for something colder? For centuries, kindness has been seen as a soft virtue, gentle, admirable, maybe even noble, but ultimately secondary to the sharper tools of human success: logic, ambition, strength, intelligence. But in recent years, a growing body of neuroscience is revealing something that upends this hierarchy entirely. Kindness, compassion, altruism, these aren't just emotional instincts or moral ideals, they are forms of intelligence. In fact, neuroscientists now argue that the neural processes behind compassion are as cognitively demanding and evolutionarily significant as mathematical reasoning, language, or spatial awareness. These acts require complex social prediction, emotional regulation, self-other distinction, and even future simulation. In other words, kindness is thinking at a highly advanced level. It's not sentimentality, it's strategy. Not only does the brain reward compassion, it works hard to generate it. This realization has reached far beyond neuroscience labs. AI researchers, too, are beginning to understand that building intelligent systems without kindness heuristics may lead us down dangerous paths. An AI that can calculate probabilities and recognize faces, but lacks any sense of care, harm, or social context is not intelligent. It's incomplete. That's why some scientists are now experimenting with embedding algorithms for empathy-like decision-making. The goal is not to make machines feel, but to help them simulate compassion in their actions, to weigh well-being, fairness, and emotional consequence as variables alongside logic. Because, as it turns out, real intelligence is not cold. It is not distant. It is deeply relational. The power of this insight is no longer just theoretical. Take the case of a violent prisoner incarcerated for years due to repeated assaults, impulsivity, and rage. He entered a study that combined brain imaging with compassion training. At the outset, his amygdala and insula, the brain's centers for fear and reactive emotion, were hyperactive. His prefrontal cortex, responsible for self-control and empathy, showed weak connectivity. Over months of guided therapy and mindfulness-based compassion exercises, his scans changed. The prefrontal cortex began to strengthen its connections. Emotional outbursts declined. And eventually, something astonishing happened. He became a mentor for younger inmates, guiding them away from the violent path he once followed. The transformation wasn't just moral, it was neural. This idea that the brain can be trained, rewired, evolved toward compassion is echoed in some of the most ancient wisdom traditions. Long-term brain studies of Buddhist monks who engage in loving kindness and compassion meditation reveal extraordinary results. Their prefrontal cortices, particularly regions linked to attention, emotional regulation, and social awareness, are more active and structurally different than those of the average person. These changes aren't fleeting, they're measurable, lasting, and correlated with reduced anxiety, greater resilience, and more accurate social judgment. These monks haven't become less intelligent through their kindness training, they've become more cognitively complex. Scientists have begun to name this phenomenon neuroaltruism. It's the idea that kindness is not a quirk of personality or a moral luxury, but a core function of an advanced brain. Just as language evolved to enhance cooperation, just as memory evolved to simulate future outcomes, kindness evolved as a sophisticated way to navigate a social world. It's not just about being nice, it's about reading a room, resolving conflict, detecting nuance, and building alliances. It's about imagining the needs of others and adjusting behavior accordingly. These are not soft skills. These are survival skills, and they are encoded deep in our neural architecture. In this light, kindness must be It is not weakness. It is not naivety. It is not secondary. It is one of the most advanced and energy-intensive tasks the brain can perform. It requires awareness, restraint, adaptation, and long-range thinking. In an age of polarization, digital overload, and algorithmic coldness, the ability to remain compassionate may be the highest form of intelligence we can cultivate, because, in the end, the smartest thing the brain may have ever learned to do is care. After decades of fragmented insight, the scientific picture is now becoming remarkably clear. Kindness doesn't just feel good, it changes the brain. Across hundreds of studies, researchers have found that acts of compassion and generosity activate the brain's reward system, releasing dopamine and oxytocin in ways that create a kind of neurological afterglow. But the impact goes deeper. Neuroscience now shows that kindness enhances neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new connections and reorganize itself over time. In other words, the more you practice kindness, the more your brain becomes wired for it. It's not just an emotional gesture, it's neural training. Even more striking is the growing evidence that compassion can affect the body as profoundly as the mind. Studies from institutions like Stanford and Harvard have shown that regular compassion practices, including mindfulness meditation, gratitude, journaling, and acts of kindness, lower cortisol levels, reduce systemic inflammation, and even influence gene expression. Telomeres, the protective caps on the ends of chromosomes that shorten with age and stress, degrade more slowly in people who consistently engage in compassionate behaviors. As one neuroscientist put it, kindness is the new frontier of brain medicine. It's not a metaphor, it's measurable. This scientific clarity is now shaping public health strategies. In hospitals, first responder units, and military veteran programs, kindness training is being used to combat burnout, PTSD, and chronic loneliness. The results are encouraging. Programs teaching healthcare workers to practice daily micro-compassions, small, intentional acts of care for themselves and others, show reduced rates of depression and emotional exhaustion. Veterans who engage in compassion-focused therapy report fewer intrusive thoughts and greater emotional stability. Even in prison systems, initiatives rooted in restorative justice and empathy training are reducing recidivism and reshaping lives. In schools, the evidence is equally compelling. Empathy-based curriculums, which teach children emotional literacy, conflict resolution, and perspective-taking, are improving academic performance and dramatically reducing bullying and classroom disruptions. Brain imaging in these children reveals increased activity in regions related to emotional regulation and decision-making. Kindness is becoming not just a social skill, but a foundational tool for cognitive and emotional development. What these findings suggest is profound. The brain learns kindness. It strengthens with repetition. It adapts, deepens, and grows. Every kind act leaves a trace, a tiny imprint in neural circuitry that makes future kindness easier, more intuitive, more natural. This answers the central question we began with. Is kindness just a chemical illusion? The answer is no. It is chemicals, yes, but also meaning, memory, and evolution intertwined. It is biology and belief. Science now confirms what philosophy and poetry have long intuited. Kindness is not a fragile moral gesture. It is an adaptive, resilient, deeply intelligent capacity that defines the human experience. And perhaps the most hopeful part of all is how simple the entry point can be. One kind act a day, even something as small as a smile, a thank you, a thoughtful message, is enough to begin reshaping the brain. Not only yours, but someone else's, because kindness spreads. It ripples outward, neuron by neuron, person by person, community by community. In a world overwhelmed by noise, conflict, and speed, science reminds us of something quietly revolutionary. The most powerful thing you can do for your brain, your health, and your society is to care. Somewhere in your brain, in a place more ancient than thought or speech, there's a quiet voice that whispers when you see someone in pain, someone lost, someone reaching. It doesn't shout, it doesn't calculate, it simply urges, help. You felt it in the small hesitation before you act, in the pull toward kindness that feels less like a decision and more like a remembering. That voice is not weakness. It is not softness. It is the echo of millions of years of survival, not through dominance, but through connection. It is the memory of every ancestor who endured not by building walls, but by building bonds. In the deepest folds of our neural architecture lives the story of humanity's greatest strength, not speed, not size, not intellect, but care. We often think of intelligence as sharpness, a solitary brilliance, a measure of how much we know or how quickly we can calculate. But what if we've been asking the wrong question? What if the true future of intelligence is not in knowing more, but in caring more deeply. Not in predicting the world with algorithms, but in shaping it with compassion. What if the next leap forward in human evolution is not technological, but emotional? Not faster circuits, but stronger hearts? What if kindness is not a reflex we must explain, but a revelation we are finally learning to understand? As the science unfolds, we begin to see the outline of something extraordinary. The brain is not just a machine of logic. It is a vessel of meaning, sculpted by shared laughter, by healing touch, by sacrifices made in silence. Every time we choose generosity, our brains respond. They light up not just with pleasure, but with purpose. They grow stronger, more resilient, more beautifully human. We are wired for connection, not by chance, but by necessity. So here is where we arrive, not at an end, but a beginning. A soft but seismic understanding. The brain may be made of cells, billions of them, firing in rhythms we are only beginning to decode. But the mind it holds is shaped by something less measurable, yet more enduring: connection. In every act of kindness, no matter how small, no matter how quiet, the brain doesn't just light up, it awakens.